But this is an issue that goes back 50 years, and that we'll still be dealing with in another 50 years, right? So it impacts state budgets, it impacts individuals' future, it impacts how businesses recruit and retain employees. So to the question of how does AARP continue to show up and remain relevant, um, it's creating that puzzle, Alice. It's knowing which voices to engage and when to engage them, and to continuously engage them on an ongoing basis.
Nothing But a Number promises engaging content tailored just for you. Join us as we dive deep into discussions on topics that matter to our communities.
Hello, I'm Alice Bennett, Associate State Director for Advocacy with AARP Georgia. Thanking you for joining us for another episode of Nothing But a Number. As we continue this conversation on work and save legislation for the state of Georgia, I have a consultant with us today who is going to be sharing information on how she has passed this work in other states, why it is so important for others to stay involved in the work, and how AARP continues to be on the forefront of getting this legislation for the state of Georgia. So Kathie, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you now to introduce yourself.
So Alice, as you noted, my name is Kathie Summers Grice, and I'm the managing partner and founder of Dirigo Partners. We are a New England-based advocacy firm, but we worked nationally. And I was thinking about the question this morning of tell us a little bit about your career, and I was thinking that my career actually started 40 years ago as a sophomore at Providence College when I was the campaign manager for then Senate Majority Leader in the Massachusetts State Senate, Dan Foley. And over the years, I've run statewide campaigns. I've worked for presidents. I've worked on presidential elections. I have been involved with more than 200 advocacy campaigns around the country, including my work with AARP and Work and Save in 2016, among others. And so it's really such an honor for me to be here today to talk to you a little bit about Work and Save and advocacy and AARP. It's a cornerstone of the work that I have done, and in my estimation, it's really my legacy project is my work with AARP.
And it is an honor for us to have you today, so thank you. So as a consultant on the national level, what has been your experience in getting Work and Save legislation passed in other states?
So one of the things that I love about advocacy issues is anytime you go into a state, you always hear the same thing. Well, we're different, you know.
And that's
Here in
true in
Georgia, we're different. Here in Massachusetts, we're different. You know, here in Oregon, we're different. And every state is unique and is different. The demographics are different. The issues are different. How people approach an issue is different. And so it's really understanding when we go state to state, what the political dynamics are in each state, who the key drivers are in each state. We say in part of our mission statement at Dirigo, where it's equally as important, the messengers are to the message, and that means aligning messages with the correct messengers for a particular state, for a particular issue, and what drives that issue. So that's really the cornerstone of what you have to do when you go into a state, is you have to understand who the key players are, what messages will drive an issue, then be able to align those two items. And in advocacy, we call this the surround sound. It's building out, how do you build out the surround sound around legislative initiatives that will help drive that initiative, right? And so we like to be storytellers. How do we build out the narrative around each individual story, to show the impact, um, of what a particular issue will have in each state. And each state with Work and Save is different, right? Um, Sometimes the voices that we engage will be very different from a Massachusetts or an Oregon, where we tend to engage more, progressive voices, more social service voices. We tend to look at, what the impact will be, amongst a broader, um, palette, of folks across the state, um, than what we might do in a state like Georgia, where we would tend to engage, a broader coalition that would include more business, more small business. How does this impact? Um, how does this impact future state budgets? How does this impact, more conservative leaning clientele? So it's really going in and understanding state to state what the political dynamics are, and how we need to engage, and what subset of the population and voices we need to engage, right? Because in Massachusetts, you have, and just for example, you have a speaker, that is a Democrat, but he's what we refer to as more a lunch pail, old time blue dog Democrat, with a little bit more progressive, Senate president. So it's understanding how those dynamics, are, and engaging voices that will drive their support.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I didn't make this very clear at the beginning, but Kathie is definitely working with us in the state of Georgia as a consultant on our Work and Save program. And that surround sound that you were speaking of, making sure that the chambers are involved, making sure that other community partners are involved, making sure the legislators are involved, it does speak volumes because, without the negative connotation, AARP is sometimes looked at as the big elephant in the room. And because we're such a large organization of advocates and we are nonpartisan, but it's always so important to have those other voices included in the conversation, included in the legislation, included as being advocates as this work passes along. So my next question for you, given that you are working with us here in the state, you understand what it means to have others involved and creating that surround sound, how should AARP or any other entity that might be looking to pass Work and Save in their state show up and remain relevant in this process?
Yeah, so it's a haul, right? It's a race in some respects because we have a timeline, but this is an issue that goes back 50 years, and that we'll still be dealing with in another 50 years, right? So it impacts state budgets, it impacts, individuals' future, it impacts how businesses, recruit and retain employees. So, to the question of how does AARP continue to show up and remain relevant, um, it's creating that puzzle, Alice. It's knowing which voices to engage and when to engage them, and to continuously engage them on an ongoing basis, right? So it's building out that content calendar of, we need to get earned media here, we need to get voices into the legislature here. And that needs to continue, right? Even though the legislature may go out at the end of April, a lot of these folks will be, continuing to campaign. 2024 is a campaign year. It's a presidential campaign year. Georgia will once again be in the spotlight. So it's right. So it's showing up at community events. There's a couple of parts here that I think are very critical. It's AARP members, engaging within their, um, kind of the confines of their social circle and their professional circle. So it's showing up at events, it's talking about this issue, whether it be at chamber events, church events, social events. It's trying to engage other voices. So that's one part of it. It's AARP as a whole, um, engaging other community partners, whether it be small business owners, chambers, um, local community events, whether it be county events or local elected officials. It's all about creating that puzzle, creating that content calendar, and then filling it in. But the work, I think, the most important work that AARP and other partners can do really starts when the legislature stops, right? Because once the legislature goes out, they're going to be campaigning, and they're going to want to hear um, why this legislation is so important. They're going to want to hear that this is something that a broad base of Georgians want and need moving forward, right? So the legislation goes in this year. We have, we have our say on it from AARP. AARP gets to go up and engage in the process. But moving forward, it's really going to be over the summertime, engaging that broad base of support and showing that it's not just AARP, right? There are other folks that believe that this is absolutely critical. And let's make no mistake about it. This is an item that is going to bust budgets, not only in Georgia, but across the country, is the lack of folks being able to and having access to the mechanism to be able to save for their retirement. And if it is not something that is taken care of in the next, say, 5 years, it's going to have an outsized impact on state budgets moving forward. So it's definitely something that legislators and key policymakers need to be hearing about across the state.
I totally agree, totally agree. And for those who are listening and might be joining in for the first time, when you say bust budgets, what do you mean when you say bust budgets and how that impacts the state?
So the more people are, so well, let me actually back up. So right now we're in a population increase in terms of people 65 and older, right? You have that the greatest generation, the baby boomers, they're all coming of age. Those that did not don't have access to pensions, did not adequately save, they will have to draw on social services moving forward, whether it be housing, healthcare. We all know that rates are going up for the cost of healthcare, for the cost of health insurance, for those who want supplemental plans, for what prescription drugs cost. If you're unable to pay for that in retirement, it has to come from somewhere. And where it comes from is the safety net programs that are in place, not only through the federal government, but also in the states. And the more people who retire without access to the income that they need to be able to pay for these services moving forward, and that includes food and housing. Those will bust budgets because the state is going to have to pay for them in some way, shape, or form. They're not going to be able to get a lot of that reimbursed through the federal government, and so to be able to accommodate for this on the front end and get the next generation, what is it, X, Y, and Z's and the millennials, get them access, right, get them access and start getting them into the routine of saving moving forward so that when they come time to retire, they have the resources to be able to do that. So it's in the state's best interests, right? But there are some folks that have made the argument, well, this is a slippery slope, and um, this is a mandate on business. Listen, this is the most conservative argument that you can make, to have businesses and folks take responsibility for saving for their retirement and having access to be able to do that, so that we take care of our state budgets and our federal budgets moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We know the cost of that for the state of Georgia between now and 2032 is about $8 million. So thank you. And I want to thank you again, Kathie, for joining us. I'm Alice Bennett, Associate State Director for Georgia's Advocacy, and we want you to stay connected with us. Please follow us along at aarpgeorgia.org/GA and follow us on Facebook, all social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, to stay connected to the work that we're doing here in the Georgia legislation and for the state. And again, we thank you for joining us for Nothing But a Number.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Nothing But a Number. Thank you so much for joining us and diving into the conversations that shape our communities. We hope you found today's discussion enlightening and inspiring. Remember, new episodes drop every Wednesday at 12 noon on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. To stay up to date with all our latest episodes and to continue exploring the topics that matter most to you, be sure to subscribe and follow Nothing But a Number on your preferred podcast platform. Your engagement and support means the world to us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with friends and family who might also find value in our content. Until next time, stay informed, stay connected, and we'll meet you right here next Wednesday. Take care.